Welcome into another episode of a Quick Timeout podcast presented by Dr. Dish Basketball. If you have yet to visit Dr. Dish Basketball and the blog there on their website, you're really missing out on some great resources. Included on those is a shooting drill series that I've designed to use with your team. For each drill, you'll have a diagram, an explanation, and also a video of the drill. To find those, simply visit drdishbasketball.com and click on blog from the drop-down menu. Again, that's drdishbasketball.com. Making his annual appearance on the podcast is CBS Sports Kyle Boone. Kyle, I previously deemed it that if you make it 3 times on the show, you're a regular. So how does it feel?
Heck yeah. No, I'm honored to have that distinction. This is always it's part of my regular stops on either the pre-draft circuit or the pre-college basketball season circuit. So I'm pumped to join you again. We always have a good talk.
Yeah, for sure. I always enjoy having Kyle on, like he said, usually the middle of the summer. And, most years there's really nothing else going on basketball wise. So it gives us an excuse to talk about basketball. This year, a little bit different, just with the NBA season pushback. And then also we have the Olympics coming up. Some of those things we'll get to in just a few moments. Let me start big picture here, talking NBA draft. How do you feel this draft ranks in comparison maybe with some of the recent draft classes that we've had?
It's really strong. I was asked to kind of gauge the depth of the draft, and here recently, and I think the depth is really good, but I think my answer is it's always judged, I think, mostly off of how good the top of the draft is, and the top of this draft is so loaded with 5 or maybe even 6 guys who could develop into all-stars, 6 guys who I think are clearly head and shoulders above the rest of this class that, to me, I think this draft is really, really impressive, and I think stacks up favorably with last year's draft. Obviously, it's way stronger than last year's draft. The Zion draft, like there are so many drafts that I think this draft class stands head and shoulders above. So it's really impressive, and even going down some of the depth too, and we can talk about some of these guys later. The Warriors have a pick at 14, for example, and a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, they're going to trade out of that and try and get a piece or two, or maybe they'll package that with something, to try and get a player next to Stephen Curry for next season. But like, you can get a really quality player in this draft at 14, and that's not necessarily always the case. So there's a lot of reason for optimism with this draft class from top down. Really, I think there's really quality options throughout.
And there at the top, Cade Cunningham, I think, seems to be the consensus number one. I think the Pistons are pretty much like all but said we're taking him. I wanted to ask you this, though. I saw a list that was posted just recently. It had him as, like, compared over the last decade, number 1 picks, and he was listed at, like, number 3, above guys like Karl Anthony Towns and Kyrie Irving. I guess, always hard to project that, but potential-wise, how accurate do you think? The only people above him was Zion, and I think we're still within Anthony Davis maybe was second.
Okay, yeah. I would definitely rank him above Karl Anthony Towns for the reason being that Cade is a guy who I think can initiate your offense, and he plays the wing position. Like he's a point guard who has wing size, and that special skill set to me is someone that you can build your team around. Karl Anthony Towns is a great player. Size wise, he's not your number 1 guy on offense. I mean, he's the skill set he has, he can stretch the floor, and a rare type of talent for his size, but Cade just being able to do what he does on offense and create and be kind of like a number 1 option on offense, like that is so valuable. I don't know if I would rank him ahead of Kyrie Irving. I mean, we're talking about Kyrie, like future Hall of Famer Kyrie Irving. That's pretty lofty standard to kind of compare to, but I mean, if you want to go Cade over Kyrie, I get the premise just being, Kyrie can be a number 1 option on offense. He can initiate your offense. He can create for others. Cade can do that too, but Cade is, 6'7", whereas Kyrie is, shorter than that. So the size, I think, in the modern NBA and what his skill set is, matches up pretty well. There's definitely some questions about Cade that I don't think there's any question that he is the best prospect in this draft. But if you're projecting ahead, like, he had more turnovers than assists at Oklahoma State. That's mildly concerning if you're betting on him to become a number one option on offense and kind of lead your offense and initiate. The athleticism part is, I think, something that should be pointed out. He's not the best, most explosive athlete. So there's some nitpicking to his game that I think is warranted, but still overall, I think in this draft where, again, there's 5 or 6 guys who I think are really, really quality options at the top of this draft, him standing above all of those guys, I think is noteworthy for sure.
So is best player the same thing to you as potential for the best career? In regards to like Cade. So
yeah.
I think everyone clearly has him as number one.
Yeah.
How many times have we seen somebody 2, 3, 4, 5 have a better career?
Yeah. Well, those are 2 different philosophies, I think. And I still think it's Cade on both fronts. If you're taking the best prospect, I think it's Cade just because of what he brings to the table. He's going to be a super high floor guy where he's going to play defense. He's going to be able to create shots. He's a guy who plays on the wing, so he's going to be a very good NBA player. Now, long-term potential, I still think Cade has the highest ceiling, just because if he hits and the athleticism question turns out to be kind of moot in the same way that the athleticism question with like Luka Doncic turns out to be moot, then he can be a superstar in the NBA, a guy who is a perennial all-star. I think you can make a case reasonably for Jalen Greene to eventually become the number one guy in this draft class just because of his elite scoring ability. Like I think he's a guy who could lead the NBA in scoring in his career. I think he's that gifted and natural of a scorer. You can make a case for Evan Mobley because he is such a dominant big man who is like a 7-foot wing. I mean, just kind of like unicorn in multiple ways. But I still think that Cade is the answer to both. Like he's the best prospect, and I think he's also going to end up being the best player in this draft too.
All right, you just mentioned them, so guys like Evan Mobley and Greene and Suggs. Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't feel this way. It's your mock draft, but as I look at other mock drafts, guys are all over the place, and I'm talking about in some cases they're literally like 5 or 6 spots lower. Does that have anything to do with? Does it have anything to do with a shortened college season? Does it have anything to do with the fact like a few of the guys in the top 8, 9 have been in the G League all year, or is it just that uncertainty and it's kind of how it always is?
In terms of where Mobley and Greene are specifically?
Well, not just them, but I'm looking at other guys that I saw in one mock draft. You got a guy like Jalen Johnson who's like within the top 10, and then he's in like 17 in somebody else's mock draft.
Yeah.
And it's not just him. There are others as well that there's oftentimes a clear cut at least 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And I've seen Evan Mobley at 3 in most mock drafts, but even that number 2 spot jumps all over the place.
Right. Yeah. Like again, I think to go back to what I said earlier, I think there's clearly 6 guys at the top of this draft. And outside of Cade, I think you could reasonably make a case that 2 through 6 could go in any order. I think you could reasonably make a case that Scotty Barnes is the second best prospect in this draft, and he could go number 2. I could also, and I think I am making the case that this is where I stand now, is I think Jalen Greene is the second best prospect. But some people think that he's the 5th best prospect or whatever. So 2 through 6, I think it's almost interchangeable just in terms of preference. Now, I think Jalen Greene, Evan Mobley, Jalen Suggs are the picks 2, 3, and 4 in some order, and then it's going to be Scotty Barnes and Jonathan Kuminga. So that aspect of it, I feel like is fairly set. But yeah, once you get to like 7 in this draft. Like 7 through 25 is just throw them in a hat. I mean, it's just completely scrambled. I think Jalen Johnson could go number 7 in this draft. I also wouldn't be surprised if he went like 23 in this draft. And there's so many different situations with some of these guys. Like Jalen Johnson left Duke early, and there's some uncertainty there. Like his half-court offense isn't super great, and there's definitely some questions there. So there's a lot of incomplete pictures with some of these guys that I think is kind of fluctuating some of their draft stock, but there's really just no clear separation between some of these guys. Like I think it almost is going to come down to, and it obviously does every year with the draft, is what philosophy teams are looking at as they try to fill out their rosters. Because at number 9, for instance, the Sacramento Kings, do they try and take someone with a super high upside long term, like Keon Johnson, who set the vertical combine leaping record in Chicago? Or do they go with someone who has like a very high floor and is going to be a very good role player like Franz Wagner? So those questions, I think, being asked is going to significantly alter what this draft looks like. And there's so many like high upside guys that I think their range are so significant, and their draft outcomes and their long-term pro outcomes are so significant, and they vary so much that it's kind of just throwing a dart at a dartboard. Who knows exactly where they're going to go? I think the guys that really fall into the category is Jalen Johnson, Keon Johnson, Kai Jones, those type of guys who long-term, if you're projecting ahead, they could be absolute stars in the league, but also like if it doesn't completely come together, like what are they going to be? Are they going to be starters in the NBA? Like I think that's a legitimate question. So that's in part I think what makes this draft so interesting and exciting is just like there's so many guys who really could join like the elite group as stars from this draft, but also like just guys who have absolutely no floor and could be complete busts.
Yeah. All right, let me go ahead and ask you some like random one-off things here.
Yeah.
It can be as long as short as you'd like. First one, a potential first rounder who maybe has a chance to make a significant impact in year 1.
My favorite guy who falls probably into this category is Miles Mcbride. And you say potential first rounder. Like I don't think it's a sure thing that Miles Mcbride goes in the first round of this draft. I have him like number 18 on my board. The size I think was like a real concern because he's like 6'2", but measured really well at the combine. Like I think had like a 6'8" wingspan. So he's super long. If you watch him at West Virginia, just like a gritty scorer who loves to compete on both ends, like a great defensive player on the ball. I think his scoring is going to translate in the NBA. I don't think he's going to be like a lead guard, but just a scoring guard who can create on offense and loves to get after it on defense. Like that type of prospect and player is someone that I would bet on, and definitely someone who I think now has definitely inserted himself into the mix as a potential first rounder, but also someone who I think based off his production at West Virginia and also like his experience. He played 2 years at West Virginia. Like he's a guy who I think could sneakily compete for playing time in the NBA, and it would probably shock a lot of people, but like what we saw at West Virginia, like I don't think it should surprise anyone if that happens.
Yeah. Next one, always intrigued by the foreign guys, so maybe best international player in this draft.
Yeah, to me, it's Josh Giddey, a guy who is coming from the NBL, where LaMelo Ball played not last season, but 2 seasons prior. Giddey reminds me of LaMelo Ball in a lot of ways, just in terms of his creation ability. His passing, like if you watch some of his passing, is just like I think he's the best. I think he has the best vision of any player in this draft, regardless of international or not. Like the way he sees the court and is able to kind of diagnose plays as they develop and even sometimes before they develop is just like is really, really special. And I always fall for guys who are like big creators, like big wings who have really good vision. Like I was really high on Denny Avdia last year, just because the size is good. Like the shooting was a question, but like his passing and the way he can kind of run transition, I thought was really impressive. Giddey, I think, is kind of like a souped up version of Denny Avdia, where he can run in transition, like he can do all those things, but like for your offense, like he can be like one of the best creators. And in the NBA, I don't know that he's going to be like a number one option, but if you have him as like a secondary creator, like that is a fantastic option. And so he's a guy who I think is going to go in the top 10 in this draft, and he's the top international guy on my board for that reason.
Is there maybe a guy positioned for success, either because he falls late in the round, or maybe a better team that has a trade that's able to move up from a previous trade, but maybe somebody that has the potential to go into a good situation and look better? I saw on your board you had, I feel like the guys that we know from the NCAA tournament, especially like when they go late in the round, we're like, oh, he went there, and potential maybe Corey Kispert. I think Kispert, I saw you had him for the Suns, something like that.
Yeah, Kispert's one that immediately stands out to me. The best shooter in this draft. Like I'm very excited to see which team he lands on, because like if he goes to the Suns, that's an amazing fit. Like the Suns need guys who, honestly, I think the Suns could and probably should target someone who can like create and initiate their offense, because clearly like in the playoffs and in the finals, like Devin Booker has been amazing as a creator, and Chris Paul has obviously been able to do that at a high level, but they need more creators. Like a fit with the Pelicans, for instance, for Corey Kispert makes a lot of sense, because obviously they want to continue to add guys who can shoot around Zion Williamson. They need guys who can stand out on three and knock down shots at a high level. Like he's 90th percentile or better in spot up shooting last season, shot 44% from three. Like he's the guy you least want to play horse against in this draft. And like that to me, I think matters. So that's going to be really interesting to see kind of where he lands. And I think he's a guy who can make an early impact. And another one that I think is kind of interesting to watch, Sharife Cooper out of Auburn. Obviously Auburn decided that it would, ban itself from the postseason last season, so we didn't get to see them in the NCAA tournament. But Sharife Cooper is really interesting. Like his passing creativity, I think is probably second best in this draft behind Josh Giddey. The size is a question. Like he's pretty tiny. The shot is a question. He shot below 30% from three last season, but still, like just the way he can create offense, the way he creates passing angles, the way he can kind of create on offense is super interesting. And like if there's a team late in the first round, like even the Lakers, like at number 22, if they decide, hey, let's take Sharife Cooper, we need someone who can kind of ease the role of creating on offense for LeBron, like that would make a lot of sense to me. And like the size, I think is a real concern. But if he's going to be a guy who just comes in off the bench and creates some offense for you, that's super interesting. So there's a lot of guys like that who I think are going to go, mid to late first round, who are going to be really, really valuable NBA players for a long time.
Yeah. All right. I have a couple 22 and beyond questions. We always love, it's not even over yet. I'm putting you on the spot here. Okay. Yeah. So, and I mentioned these, as I mentioned before, we're at the end of pre-qualifying for the Olympic tournaments. We also had the U19 stuff a couple weeks ago. We had Chet Holmgren versus Victor Wembanyama. Your thoughts maybe of those two guys, either what they did against each other. There's a lot made of that. I don't know what you can do as far as one game goes, but
right.
And then also maybe the individual skill set of both. And then I would assume, I'm guessing that you have both of them atop your boards. I just saw too the other day that Victor, if they move the draft rules, could actually be eligible this coming year, which would make for a very intriguing 1-2.
Yeah. The tank would be on for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I haven't sorted out my boards for 22 and 23 yet. I do know Chet would not be number one on my board. I think it's probably going to be Paulo Banchero. I haven't like made that official yet, but I think that's kind of where I'm leaning. Chet is super interesting though. I mean, like a 7-footer who just has like the longest limbs known to mankind, who basically plays like a guard, but just like him being able to create on offense and block shots at his size is just like unnatural. And that's kind of the same thing with Victor. Just his long limbs, like the way he can impact the game on both ends of the floor is so special. Like his block rate is just insane. Like just blocks everything. And just his two-way game, I think he's going to be the number one pick in whatever draft he's in. I don't think there's any question. I think he's probably the best basketball prospect, like draft prospect, regardless of classification, whether he's 21, 22, 23. Like I think he would go number one in this draft. I really do. Like that matchup in qualifying was pretty interesting. Like Victor was clearly the better player, and Chet took home MVP because Team USA won. But yeah, that was pretty eye-opening experience just watching. Like I've already used unicorn once, but like two true unicorns, like what they can do at their size is kind of unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Paulo. What makes him a better prospect to you than Chet?
Yeah, like I actually worry about Chet being so tall and lanky. Like he's very Kristaps in a lot of ways. Porzingis, where like he's just so tall and like the skill set is tantalizing. I just worry about guys that size who are that scrawny, and obviously he's going to put on weight and he'll be able to hopefully, I think, better equip himself for the NBA and hopefully be able to avoid injuries. But like, I always think those guys are just a little bit more injury prone. I also, just as like a general philosophy, I always lean towards guys who don't play center to be like the number one pick. Like, I more think like if you're thinking long term, like upside, the guys who you want to build your team around are guys who are initiators, who are guards. Now, obviously, there's some exceptions. Like Nikola Jokic is just like you can build your team around him because just as his passing ability, the way he can create stuff like that. And I would still take Victor number one, regardless of class. But Paulo to me is like just he has a lot of wing skills. Like he's very bouncy. I think he's gonna be able to stretch the floor. Like I think I just would lean that way. Now Chet is probably, I think right now probably gonna go number one in next year's draft. Like I would guess. And I'm not like taking the Paulo versus Chet side just to be a contrarian, but I really think like in a vacuum I would just take Paulo over Chet. That's just kind of a personal preference for me.
And potential there for Duke to be able to have similar to what they had a couple of years ago with RJ and Zion, AJ Griffin as well.
Yeah, Griffin's going to be probably a top 5 pick, top 10 pick. And Griffin to me is pretty interesting. Like he's a guy who I think could push to be the number one pick in next year's draft. Paulo is probably going to have like the better prospects overall, but like this season, if he's just like amazing and just goes out and takes college basketball by storm, like that would surprise me at all. Duke's going to be really interesting. Like I actually think Duke can win the title this season. And Paulo and AJ Griffin, like those guys, I don't think are Zion and RJ, but they're pretty close. Like they're pretty good. And, that team is going to be pretty stacked. Duke is going to be in for kind of a bounce back. Like that's going to be pretty interesting to watch. And then just also like Coach K being in his final season, like there's just a lot that I think if it falls right for Duke, like Duke is going to be maybe the best team in college basketball. Like that's going to be really interesting.
We'll finish on a good note of you saying nice things about Duke, something when you were on the show last time you definitely didn't do. So we'll just go ahead and end it there. Before I let you go, where can people either connect with you or read the things that you have on CBS Sports, whether that's your mock draft What are some of the articles that you have there?
Yeah. So like if you want to follow me on social media, I have Twitter and it's Kyle_Boone. If you want to read my work, I don't really share my work that much on Twitter. So, you can go to like the CBSSports.com and if you go to like the basketball arena or NCAA basketball or NBA draft arena, you can find my stuff. If you want to connect with me, like you've got takes about my Paulo Banchero side or my Chet Holmgren slander, you can email me. And that's kyle.boone@cbsinteractive.com. I try and always respond to people because I think if you reach out and you want to have a conversation, I'm more willing to do that than if you're trolling out on social media. It's generally a better conversation. So.
For sure. That's Kyle Boone of CBS Sports. Always a pleasure, my man.
You got it. Thanks for